This show being what, I don't know, I tried to count them a minute ago, about 20 books that we've done in this series from the works of Rudolf Steiner have gotten from the beginning, which were the questions I used to get as a teacher trainer all the time that I was tired of answering. So I thought, well, let's put these into, articles and then books, and where I'd pass them out to people, to try to save me from having to repeat it. But what we've been dealing with in these last few books, especially this one today, is so special and it's so profound. And it's actually for someone like myself, if you don't know, I studied religion and was deeply involved in it. And until I came across the deeper aspects of Rudolf Steiner's Christology, I didn't fully understand. Everything was confusing. You couldn't put the pieces together. It didn't make any sense. We're going to go into this today. But for example, that there's two different stories of the birth of Jesus. One's in Jerusalem, one's in Bethlehem, one's for a poor person from. The stories are all different, and everyone says, "Oh no, but it's literal." Well, the only way it could be literal is if you understood it as a mystery tradition, and if you had the wisdom of Rudolf Steiner to interpret what we find in the Gospels. So today we're going to go into two of the biggest mysteries there are. Now, one of them I started off to say, I really need to explain what Rudolf Steiner is saying, because these are the deeper questions about the realm of spiritual economy, or the realm of Shambhala, this super etheric realm around the earth that holds the memory of all of the great beings who've ever died, who had really perfected something, is still held there for them when they return, and held there for use of others if it was perfected. And so we're going to talk about that realm. And that is very, 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 very difficult to describe. And there's a lot of side roads and misinterpretations and fantasies about that. But before you can understand that, we have to talk about what Steiner called in just one lecture, the pre-earthly deeds of Christ. And then in another one, he described it a little bit. And then he refers to it as if everyone knows this. And later on, he says, oh, yes, well, the pre-earthly deeds of Christ gave you Waldorf educators what you are building on is the basis of the gifts of Christ to a child standing upright, speaking and thinking, which later becomes the capacities for reading, writing, and mathematics. And some people in Waldorf education, if I said this to 9 out of 10 Waldorf teachers in America, they'd look at me like I was crazy. And if I talked about the pre-earthly deeds of Christ with an anthroposophist in all their detail, because there's not just 3 deeds, there's 7 deeds, they would really think you were crazy. So that's where we're going today. So if you're not, please put on your life jackets, your anthroposophic threefold life jackets, and put on your hard hat, because we're going to go someplace today that cannot be described by words, but we're going to attempt to. So when my teacher, Werner Glass, before he'd talk about this, and very, very seldom did he ever talk about this, he'd take off his glasses dramatically and throw them down. And then he'd look at you like if you didn't take what he was going to say seriously, he was going to really, I don't know, explode or something. But he would take from the Christian community a phrase, a prayer, that the priest says before he does the consecration, to make sure that the priest is really clear in every part of his body. So the priest says, and you're not supposed to take this out of the Christian community, but Werner did so in tradition of Werner Glass, who's in threefold heaven, probably threefold anthroposophic heaven, that is. I'm going to read this in that tradition, because after this, I hope not to be a smart aleck, but I hope to really take seriously this astounding message that we're going to give you today. Before my mouth the threshold be guarded, a wall hinder my error from streaming around me. All evil be taken from my words, and goodwill pour into them.
Yes. When you approach such exalted subject matter, it asks you a question. It asks you to be able to have the resolve, to be able to muster the reverence that is needed to approach such a profound subject. And so it's with admittedly a little bit of trepidation, because when one looks at the span of Rudolf Steiner's material over excess of 6,580 some lectures, 50 published books and materials, and so how does one take something that's at the core of the message that Rudolf Steiner was attempting to share with mankind? How do you share that with people in a way that's going to be understandable for them? And so I know we're going to have probably a great many people that this is their first encounter with our conversations. And I can only give you a caveat that, well, perhaps you might want to reapproach this material after you've gotten some of the fundamentals under your belt, because it'd be a lot easier for you to digest it.
Yes, this book, the newest book, The Perfected Bodies of Jesus Christ in the Realm of Spiritual Economy, is, I must admit, audacious, because in fact you can't put into words what is being described here. You have to live with this for 20, 30, 40 years, and then it kind of then fills in. For instance, since we don't learn to stand upright, speak, and think until we're about 3 years old, and that's the first time that the human I am usually comes into a human being. You see this in a child up to age 3, usually, if they're unspoiled. And I've been with my grandchild, Tyler's grandchild, who I've adopted, who is under 3, just turned 3. And for the last 3 years, I've been in ecstasy. I've been, anytime I'm in the presence of that child, because I'm watching the forces that come in. The child, they've tried to estimate what percentage greater it is that is working in a child from birth till 3 compared to the rest of their life. Basically, in those first 3 years, you do as much as you do in the rest of your life. You stand upright and somehow find a balance, which is really quite miraculous. You learn to speak, but that also means you learn to hear. So you have to learn to hear, discriminate, and speak. Speaking is incredibly difficult, especially for a child who's mostly right-brained, not left-brained. So I'm saying to my child, my 3-year-old, 3, you're 3, help me count, 1, 2, 3. And he's looking at me like, man, those are nice fingers. So he grabs them and starts, just playing with them. So this is what we're talking about. Think of it. And then when you're in school with a child from age 7 to 14, you're working on the etheric body, but the physical body is up to age 3. The Christ is lifting that child up. So we're going to talk today about the way that Christ intervened in the time when humanity itself was lifting itself up, which was ancient Lemuria. Now I'm going to try to take this slow. But looking at what I have to try to get across in 2 hours is almost impossible, even if I spoke as fast as I usually do. So anyway, on Lemuria, now remember, there were 2 periods before that, Polaria and Hyperborea. Well, on Polaria, you could say we were recapitulating ancient Saturn on ancient Hyperborea. Please correct me, John, because once I get into all this jargon, I may easily make a mistake. But we recapitulate when we came to Earth, to the Earth incarnation, we recapitulated ancient Saturn, ancient Sun, ancient Moon. Well, we do the same when we came to a new age after Atlantis. And so we're in the 5th post-Atlantean age. Well, there was Atlantis, then there was Lemuria, then there was Hyperborea, then there was Polaria. Now, we can go into incredible detail about how this is basically a recapitulation of the formation of our solar system, but in a very quick, very small form. Now, people wouldn't understand this unless they understood the plasmic electric universe and its relationship to the etheric formative forces, which we're putting out a book on here very soon. Because without that, you can't understand cosmology. And what we're talking about here is cosmogenesis and anthropogenesis. The genesis of the cosmology is different than the genesis of the earth and humanity. So the beings on the sun give us all of our life. And so that being on the sun, when you stand upright in ancient Lemuria, around a very volcanic Lemuria, which Steiner said that most people couldn't incarnate at that time. They had to live out on the planets, and only the very strongest of beings incarnated. Imagine there was a being who incarnated that we can call the human being Adam. And at that time, the sun forces were very powerful. And it basically, as you understand if you study the ethers, standing upright is really because the sun is sucking you towards it. Now, I'm sorry to laugh, but that sounds very terrible. But it's true. The sun is contracting matter towards itself and burning it all up to send out to us warmth, light, sound, life, all forms of it, cosmic forms of it, and also the ether. Now, we're going to have to talk about the ethers today. And once you start me on the ethers, John won't get a word in edgewise, because now I'm going to talk about the Akashic ether as a confusion for what so many people are attributing to other things. But if you look at the Akashic ether, warmth, light, sound, and life, the first standing upright, as we kind of recapitulated ancient Saturn in our Earth incarnation, that probably lost everyone. But as we did that on Lemuria, we're answering the sun, aren't we? And then we had a time that we went to Atlantis. And Rudolf Steiner says the original Garden of Eden was on Lemuria. So therefore, the original Adam and Eve. Please, John, don't let me go there today. Explaining both sides of this story, because they're different, quite different, but they go together. So we can't forget the fact that if there was a primal Adam and Eve, there was probably a primal heavenly Adam and Eve. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But then on Lemuria, because of the intervention of Christ on Lemuria, it helped us stand up through the sun forces, because Christ worked through the Elohim, or the Exousiai, the beings of form, helped us stand upright. You look at a child below age 3. You watch them stand upright. What do? It's amazing for the human being who actually perceives that. You are looking at cosmic forces. That's as close as you're going to get. After that, it all wanes until you turn old like me, and then it's like standing right in front of you. But after all the middle time, we get lost in the material world. So on Lemuria, we stood upright. On Atlantis, there were 2 other really Garden of Edens, or a second Garden of Eden, where we learned to speak. Now, Steiner says that on Atlantis, there was one language, and he called it T-A-O, Tao. Right, John? Or how would you pronounce it?
Well, Tao, it depends on where, again, as soon as a language comes into being, it develops a kind of a morphology that has to do with the environment of the individuals, rather than what one might consider racial considerations. It's more a geographical morphology. And so it's quite fascinating when Rudolf Steiner gets into explaining how we take up elements of our environment in our development. And this helps to foster the nature of our evolution. And so what Douglas is sharing here, it's like it gets so deep, so fast that I trust that some of you will be able to take this up in the right way and do the kind of preliminary research that would be helpful to understand what we're talking about.
Yes, and let me recapitulate, because as I'm thinking about what I just said, I must clarify something here. So in ancient Polaria, which can be described as somewhat, but without any pulsation. See, there's this pulsation going on between incarnation, concretization, and condensation, and excarnation, pralaya. In the cosmos, we call that plasma, and it's filled with electromagnetism, and that when the electromagnetism comes together, we call that life ether, and that causes planets and suns and things to congeal. So in ancient Polaria, that was warmth, and ancient Hyperborea, that was air. I'd love to describe those to you. Only Steiner describes those completely. Others like Scott Elliott and Churchward and others try to describe them. Even Velikovsky got kind of lost in that kind of electrical universe cosmology, which gets pretty wild out there. I'm not talking wild. I'm talking about, we just did a book that proved all this, okay? And science went out there, collected all the details. They don't have any theories for it. So happens, if you look closely at Steiner, you'll find these details. And that's why I have trust in him. I started off as a Christian. Until I came to Steiner's view of Christianity, I wasn't complete, and I was obsessive. John can verify that. I'm somewhat of an obsessive scholar, we'll say that. And I don't let up until I find what I'm looking for. And it took me 70 years to find some of these things, which I just recently found. And it's in this book on plasma because I overlooked them, because Steiner couldn't speak of some of these things at his time. So he couldn't speak about what we're going to speak about today at his time. He would have been completely ignored and considered a lunatic, which he says many times, that if people took his secret teachings of anthroposophy, which were only for members, shared them with the public, they would say he's a lunatic. That is probably true.
Yes, but now we're getting to the point to where modern science is coming up with things that they admit they can explain. It appears as if it's alive from the way it acts, so that you can't just merely pin it down as some kind of a after effect of some kind of field activity, so that there's a certain animistic almost side of nature that's arising, and it's arising in something that they, mind you, tell you is not material. Okay, so when was the last time you heard modern science talking about something that isn't material?
When they were debunking it, calling it chicanery and fake and spiritism and all that stuff, now they're finding out, hey, why are 10,000 orbs of light dropping from the sky and outrunning our fighters, and we send hypersonic missiles after them and they leave them in the dust, and then
they're not physical.
And they're not physical. They pass right through the missile, or they pass through an airplane, or they pass through the ISS, the International Space Station, or they pass. Okay, that's what's happening. But that's in the book, folks. And I mean, we explained it all there for you, so that if you think what we're going to talk about today is going to be tough to handle, once you understand what plasma is, and you understand that Rudolf Steiner says plasma creates lightning. Okay, lightning is plasma. Everything in the universe is plasma. The only thing that's not plasma is what's on the surface of the earth called the lithosphere. And we little humans live between the lithosphere and the troposphere, but this big, and that's 0.001% of the universe that we know of. And then we try to take those rules and apply it to the world. So we're going to explain things to you about the super etheric world that you're going to say, yeah, that can't exist in the physical world. Correct. It's not in the physical world. And anyone who tries to attribute this to being God in the physical world is nothing more than another scientific materialist, or spiritual, spiritual materialism. So essentially, warmth, light, sound, life. We're here, life. We had 3 stages before: warmth, light, sound. And we go through that with ancient Polaria, ancient Hyperborea, ancient Lemuria, ancient Atlantis. And now we're post-Atlantis. So what happened on Atlantis was really a lot to do with, that was the 4th. And that's when human beings incarnated. That's when the template was created. So there were 2 more times on Atlantis that the being of the sun, the solar deity of the Holy Trinity, Christ, moved through, let's call it right now, before I have to try to explain this, the template of the human being. How's that one, John? I just made that up. The schemata, if you want to be very modern.
The archetype.
The archetype of the human being. But we're talking about a very specific archetype.
And a very real thing. It's not just an imagination.
You can experience this. And if you don't, then you're probably not experiencing the etheric Christ, because you'll experience this archetype before you experience the etheric Christ. I speak from experience. and others that I know that have had that experience, many others. And it's basically would be written off with materialism. And what we're going to tell you today might be written off as materialism as called 0 point or vacuum, or now they call it the A field, as John called it. They just make it a field.
I like what Walt Whitman said. He said, "I sing the body electric."
That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. Now, I'm going to try to get through this, because if you don't get this, if you don't get the fact that let's see if I can do this on screen. You're coming down, and then you're going what's called the bathtub, and you come, and then you're going back up to where you came from. Oh, I made a very bad bathtub. The water would leak out of that thing. Anyway, a U. Invert. What do they call that in science? It's the most common of all plotted graphs. Okay, it's you come into incarnation, you go out of incarnation. That's what we're doing. Because we're in the Earth incarnation, the fourth of the Earth incarnations, and because we're in the fifth post-Atlantean, you go, oh, yeah, oh, there he goes again. There was Atlantis, and there was Lemuria, there was Hyperborea. I would love to tell you about Hyperborea. You did really blow your mind. And then there was Polaria. Oh, we now have science admitting to those. They're called stars 1, or stars 3, stars 2, stars 1. And they say after the Big Bang, there was inflation. And then between inflation and the creation of our planet, there was stars 3 created what? Warmth. Stars 2 created what? Light. Oxygen. Stars 3 created what? Water through hydrogen. And now we're on the Earth. That is Steiner's cosmology. They've now come to the point that they have to admit that their observations show that there are 3 prior stages to the Earth that we couldn't exist without. Okay, we have 3 prior deeds of Christ that Steiner called the pre-earthly deeds of Christ. So before Christ came to Earth, his 4th deed, even though there was a 3.1 and a 3.2, what we may or may not talk about, but now Christ came to Earth, mystery of Golgotha, the birth, the death, the resurrection of Christ, his 4th deed. The first 3 taught people to stand upright in Lemuria, speak in Atlantis, and think, or have their 7 organs. Because if you don't know that under your rib cage, you have the 7 planets active, with the heart being the sun, and then your other organs being the other planets. So you're talking to the planets, and the planets are talking to you. And your template of you, well, that template was decided on before I think the Earth was even created. So, this is part of the plan, and that's what you're coming to. So on Earth, you're supposed to realize, hey, I'm in someone might say, the 4th dimension. Well, kind of, yeah, but yes, but not exactly that. And we're going to the 5th. So people will say that people are doing 5D work, 6D work, 7D work. Well, guess what? There will be that. And if Christ gave us 1, 2, 3 pre-earthlies, and then he came down in the 4th to the Earth, then he's going to give us the 5th, 6th, and 7th, isn't he? Because why? We have 7 stages we have to go through. Now, we're in the 5th post-Atlantean. Now, this is where it gets complicated. I'm not going to go there, John. Don't worry. Relax. I'm just going to say that there's the 5th post-Atlantean, then there's the 6th and the 7th. And though it's not the whole big picture, what it is, it's a mini picture of what's to come. So what is Christ doing for us in the 5th, 6th, and 7th deeds? In the 4th deed, let's just go to that one. Science will tell us that we came from, now you want to talk about fairy tales, a ball of matter that can fit in my palm that exploded and became all of this. But then they added inflation. Now they've added stars 3, stars 2, stars 1, and then the Earth. If you explain that in anthroposophic terms, that's not so far wrong. But it didn't come from a big bang. It came from just the fact that out there in the universe, It's as simple as all the psychics tell you. It's male, female. It's positive, it's negative. If you study atomic science, oh, guess what? You know what they're going to teach you? Sex. Positive and negative. And when they come together, guess what happens? Not only neutral, but creativity out of nothingness. That's exactly what happens in the cosmos. Down here on Earth, much more complicated, much more complicated. We had to have Christ intervene again and again because of what is in this prayer. The forces of hindrance will come up and give us the ability to be alone on the earth and think that there's no God. Okay? I mean, really, that's what it's come to, so that we could have the choice. I think John pointed at this before, that in the future, we're not going to have so much choice, because let's just say in the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th, we're going to start to see Christ manifesting more starting in 1933 than ever before, so that some people start to see the effects of Christ in this super etheric realm, as Steiner called it, around the earth. I think I made a list someplace where there's like 50 names for this in anthroposophy. You can call it Shambhala, you can call it New Jerusalem, you can call it Eden Redeemed, you can call it whatever you want, Tushita Heaven, on and on and on. The point is that there's something that we're building for the future right now, and that's the key factor. If this isn't psychic hoo-ha, this is clairvoyant perception of people who can see that you are building. Now, if you could put on infrared glasses, you would be shocked what you would see. You'd see all this stuff happening, and all you'd be doing is go, what is that? I've had them on. Trust me, I know. You're at night and you're out there. What are you seeing? These balls rising up out of the earth. And you're going, excuse me, this is Bravo 2. What are those damn balls? I mean, serious, when you see them, they scare you, okay? Because they're nothing like science ever taught us, whether they're dropping from the sky or whether that's a gift of plasma from the sun, which we describe in this new book on plasma called, Tyler gave it the name, beautiful name, The Mystery of Life Found in Plasma. Because when you look at this and you go, oh, that's where we're going. Got it. If you just want a materialistic view of this, you could see these realms happening right now. And you could try to describe it with materialism, and you would be wrong. Let's just say that Christ's mystery on the earth basically took what was entropic and made it ectropic, or non-entropic, as they call it. So we were going from a spiraling nebula that somehow there was a finger in the sky that just stirred stuff up, and we went from this spiraling hot nebula of warmth that turned into, well, not even warm, now they say warmth, but gravity, somehow it just spun around gravity. And that's what we came from, and we're going to go down to what? Cold cosmic death. Well, that's so unimaginative, because they don't understand that the cosmos is breathing. Now, science, if you put together the data of science, will show you that this is happening, and you can start to look at what the future of humanity is going to be, which we put in our books here, lots of them, and you can start to, in your mind, see things that aren't just limited to earthbound perception. So imagine, let's just go into, before we go into the future, John, can you attempt, I'm going to dump this on John. Can you attempt to describe the Nathan child and why this is important?
Yes. Well, when you look at the let's go to the alternative first, because up until recent times, science was really trying to explain to you that everything resolves in entropy, that everything, basically the universe will collapse upon itself into a state of unconscious darkness, and then everything will just go away. That there will, goodbye, you did all this and it led to nothing. Now they're getting to the point where they're seeing that there's these extra physical realities that they haven't taken into consideration within their equations. And so now they're having to stretch their imagination profoundly just to be able to include this in their cosmology. And so it's not easy because they take the mental constructs that they've developed in material science and they translate them into conjectures regarding these new observations. And because they're basically inside out, upside down, and backwards, they get it wrong. And so what we're trying to approach here is that we're in a living universe. And within the living universe, there is frequently what you might call a counterpart to this reality. And what Douglas is bringing up here when he talks about the Nathan being is like, well, what is that Nathan being that's being referred to? And Rudolf Steiner talks about it on numerous occasions, thankfully, because it's not an easy subject. But a lot of this material we've covered in the other books that we've managed to put together up to this point. But let me say that just as there's an Adam and Eve, there is a Adam Kadmon, as it's called in the Kabbalah. The Adam Kadmon and the Eve Kadmon. And those are the kind of soul pairs of the original Adam and Eve, of the first, just like in everything else. There's always something that's the first one. It doesn't like all of a sudden there's 100,000 of them. That's not the way in which the process of metamorphosis unfolds. So you have this primal Adam and primal Eve that Rudolf Steiner talks about. They're the first beings to translate into physical being. And that was during the Lemurian period. But also during that period, there was conjoined to them these parts of human beingness that did not take the step into matter. And they maintained their existence unsullied within the supersensible worlds that are above the earthly realm. And so you have these consorts, so to speak, that are a parallel development of mankind and that are able to interact with human evolution at strategic points. And Rudolf Steiner gives specific examples of how these archetypal beings that have had no physical incarnations, how they've interacted with mankind at various mystery centers throughout the globe. But it'd be very easy to kind of lose you by going down all those paths right at this point. And I hope that we can do so more thoroughly in the future. But let it just be said that there is this archetypal Adam Kadmon and the archetypal Eve Kadmon, so that you have these beings, and they're divine spiritual beings that hold within them the potential of mankind's future evolution, and were brought into manifestation into the earthly realm during the mystery of Golgotha.
Beautiful. It is so difficult to describe. That was beautifully done. Let me just say, I'm going to call that the spiritual template, the archetype, spiritual archetype, something like that. And so the spiritual archetype helped the being of the sun. Steiner calls that being the Nathan child. Let's just say, as I describe this, I'll just go to that point later. As Christ is looking down on the human beings on Lemuria, they needed to stand upright. So he worked with the archai, the beings of time, to help them stand upright through this archetype. Now, I always imagine, and this is my speculation, that as he worked through this being to humanity as a whole, then it seems as if that's like the template that changes everything after it almost. So that once the one human being learned to stand, and the human beings in general learned to stand on Lemuria, some couldn't. They had to go to the outer planets. This was a gift that was then passed on as, how does a child learn to stand upright? By watching people who are standing upright. Go ahead, try to explain it. I've seen scientists just stumble over themselves trying to explain how we stand upright or even walk. So then with the second phase, you have this same solar being working through this spiritual template, this archetypal being on Atlantis to help us to learn speech, a universal speech, the speech of Tao, which was a magical speech, by the way. And all of these, we could go off on a whole talk with just one single reference we're making here. And then again later with balancing the organs. Because at that time it was the physical had come into existence, but it had already gone through warmth, light, liquid, and earth. And earth wasn't as solid as it is now. Matter of fact, Steiner talks about the way that earth, water, and air were all mixed together. It was almost as if they lived in a fog and they couldn't even see the sun the way that we see the sun now. But eventually their organs, through the music of the spheres of this balanced planetary influence in our own solar system, created their bodies just right. And we hear the reference to the fact that the Atlanteans sunk because they mixed with animals or they misused crystals. Well, all of that is the misuse of the physical. So they were everything was more malleable at that time. So yes, mixing stone and water. Well, they built megaliths in the ancient times, didn't they? And mixing water with air. Oh, well, they floated. They floated, almost sailed. They sailed through the sky. Or mixing water with warmth. This is the whole thing is that on Atlantis was the beginning of warmth, light, sound, and life coming together, and standing upright, speaking, and thinking happened. But then the Tower of Babel happened when Atlantis sunk, and then people went in different directions. And as John pointed out before, their language was determined by the very environment. In other words, the language of the land influenced the language of the people living on the land. So then we go from that time all the way up to the time of Christ. Now, there's two other times that Christ came down through different beings to kind of give some teachings. But Christ's body only came down in the Essene community with that pure Eve Kadmon that John talked about and the pure Adam Kadmon in that community, that Essene community. And this is the child that's described being born in Bethlehem in a humble stable, and his mother could speak with him from the time he was born. But others would look at him throughout most of his life up till the time he was 12 and think that something was wrong with him. He was not developing properly. And that was one of the stories. And that story happens to the Luke Gospel. And when you read that, you hear a completely different story than in the Matthew Gospel. And in the other Gospel, you have the kings coming to worship a king, and King Herod being jealous, all about kings. And that the family, Joseph and Mary, pick up and move to Egypt to save the king, because the Magi, the kings, came to worship the king. And Herod wanted to kill all the children. That's not even mentioned in the other story. So you hear these different stories and you go, what is that? Well, Steiner combines those to point out who those beings are. And so in that incarnation, that is not one being. That's this perfect being, plus one of the wisest beings who ever incarnated. And then at age 30, when John the Baptist baptized Jesus of Nazareth, he became the Christ indwelling in the body of Jesus of Nazareth. And some of the other consciousnesses that had been prepared for thousands of years, millennia, left the body. And all this is described in the fifth gospel of Rudolf Steiner and in our books. Because why? It's very difficult to surmise all this until you read all of them. Don't make any judgments until you read all 400 books or whatever it is. And read his students, because you wouldn't understand the books unless you read the students who then summarized it for you. That's what we're trying to do. So this gift of Christ, one time only, the earth was dying. Christ incarnated. His incarnation brought his blood, divine blood, into the earth, which redeemed the earth's dying entropic nature. And so life came through his resurrection. And what did he say? He went up in the clouds. So if you want to say, where is, if you want to ask the question, where's Christ now? And you look at the Bible, it's going to say, well, he rides in the cloud. He ascended to the clouds. He works in the clouds. We can beat him in the clouds. The clouds, 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 clouds. Nothing about his throne, except at one point it does say he rose to his throne, but then could be found in the clouds. So what does that mean? That's the etheric realm. So Christ's fifth deed, his fourth deed was dying to bring life to the earth in the human body. Now his fifth deed was to bring life to the etheric body, the life body of the earth, that body where memory is stored, perfected memories of people who have done something spectacular that in their next incarnation, maybe they want to continue that on. So they grab that from the etheric realm that they leave there as they go out into the astral and the ego realms, we'll call it at this point. And they come back and Christ perfected the physical body, etheric body, astral body, the sentient soul, intellectual soul, consciousness soul, and basically has gone on to the spirit soul, very much like the being of Sophia or the Holy Sophia, or the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Sophia. They've gone ahead of us. And so I wanted to read this. The whole thing comes down to this one phrase. And this phrase is absolutely crucial because it's the promise, and it's what ties all of this together. It's from John 14:2. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. Let me read that again. That where I am, there ye may be also. And whither I go, ye know, and the way ye know. In other words, the analogy usually given in all the Bible commentary is that this is when they traveled to Jerusalem for the holy days, they had caravans. They had to travel so the bandits wouldn't get them. So sometimes people would travel faster and go from one caravan to the next, but no matter what, the way of the caravan had already been traveled by the people who set up the pilgrim's path. And so what he's describing here to a Hebrew would have been, I'm on the pilgrim's path. I've already gone there. I've already come back. I'm taking you with me. We're all going together. And when you get there, I'm going to make sure that you know where you're at. That's exactly what all of incarnation is all about. That's why Christ had to have 7 earthly deeds. And the fourth deed is Christ's appearance in the etheric realm of the earth, the realm of spiritual economy, brought about the transformation of human memory, whereby he became the Lord of karma and the great guardian of the threshold, and placed the perfected bodies of Christ Jesus, his etheric body, astral body, sentient body, intellectual body, consciousness, soul body, and I, into the realm of spiritual economy. Those are the caravans, folks. That's what we're all working on. And once Christ perfected them, all we have to do is become worthy enough to rise into that invisible realm. And like the people we're going to describe in the second half, at the end of this talk, and in the second talk even more, there are people who have gone there and done that. And Steiner names them. And we know who they are. And so we put it down in a nice list for you. So you could say, oh my, if I want to know what Christ acting in the realm of the etheric might sound like, and I ignore all that other person's stuff, but they got the etheric right, I'm going to see what's etheric and what it is they might have to say and realize that there's almost an echo of the Christ in that. And that is so crucial. I cannot underscore for you the fact that Christianity is inexplicable because of the way that it's spread. But we're going to explain to you through Steiner's work that not only are there these deeds of Christ in the etheric right now, where the second coming of Christ is happening, where you can have a Damascus experience and experience the spiritual template as an angel, like a guardian angel, before you experience Christ in the etheric, because that's where he is, trying to redeem the etheric body of the earth. But at the same time, you can know even the future of the way that Christ is going to redeem your astral body in the future and your eye. And when that happens, you're going to begin to think that Christ, even in the future 6th and 7th post-Atlantean epochs, you're going to think that Sophia, the wisdom of Christ, is walking right next to you. You think that you're talking to the being of wisdom, like everyone chases the being of wisdom in all the traditions. Wait until that being walks right next to you. And you say, well, I want to understand this about Christ. Is Christ in plasma? Or whatever question you have, it doesn't matter. You're going to have wisdom walking by your side. If you have seen, if your eyes have been open and your ears have been open and unclogged, and you dedicate yourself in your study to this kind of work, and understand that no matter if Steiner's description of it is exactly right or not, doesn't really matter. If you think this through, you go, yeah, who's the spirit that helps the child stand upright? How does a child learn to speak? How do some children learn to think and some never do? And why do Down syndrome children never have a single evil thought in their entire life, and they die at puberty usually? How can that be? I have evil thoughts all the time. Everyone I know does. How can autistic children who are nonverbal have astounding capacities of love and compassion and wisdom that you can't even imagine? Because they are in the arms of Christ. And that is what we're trying to explain today. The pre-earthly deeds of Christ are so clear in human development that if you understand them and you see where it's going, it gives you the greatest hope that any cosmology possibly can.
Yes, and getting into looking at this more closely, I'm sure there are people that are watching this that have some experience in attempting to unlock the mysteries of Holy Scripture and the New Testament and do a comparative study. Nobody did it more diligently than the Emperor Julian. And Rudolf Steiner makes this point. He says, you know, people come out and they put out their publications, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but they put out their publications pointing out the discrepancies between the Gospels and all of that. And he says, and really, none of them have improved on the questions that were asked by Emperor Julian way back in the day, and that there are certain things within Scripture that don't add up if you just take it on its surface value. If you look at it and you go, well, okay, the genealogies are different, and they're in different cities that they're born, and so there's all this discrepancy, and Rudolf Steiner is the only person that clears up all those questions, and he does it in a way in which he doesn't expect you to accept what he's saying. All he's saying is try to understand what he's sharing with you and have a healthy suspension of disbelief. And that if you do that, that it will bring you into relationship with the material in a way that is very, very profound. And I can only speak from personal experience, but all I can say is that when one is on the path of truth and one is able to come to a source of truth, it has a transformative effect on your what you might call your heart mind, in that you can develop a sense for truth and you can be able to look deeper into subjects without closing your mind to alternative interpretations. And so that's the type of judiciousness that's necessary to be able to approach such profound materials. Because in the long story, I mean, what Douglas and I have attempted to do here with the brilliant help of your wife, Dr. Tyler Gabriel, running the whole show is to be able to give you a curriculum that enables you to be able to encompass some of these ideas. Because a lot of times, like Douglas was referring to earlier about that one lecture on the pre-earthly deeds of Christ, if you don't know that, you can't put it all together. And it's just one lecture. So these materials, Rudolf Steiner was very clear. He said, spiritual science is the most difficult subject you can study. But that being said, I'd like to think that Douglas and I, along with Tyler, in our efforts have tried to make this easier for you.
That's what it always was. A lot of these things I started as teaching aids to give to teachers who were studying to be Waldorf teachers. So they'd ask these difficult questions. They go, I'm so glad you asked. Here, let me give you this piece of paper. This is what you want to do. And here's the thing. Now we're doing this because it's anthroposophy's gone a strange way, and so is Waldorf, and we just want to grab the core teachings of Steiner and make them accessible. Okay, so I don't want to read over the fact that Christ has become the Lord of Karma and really the guardian of the threshold. And so now he is also the guardian of memory. Well, where is memory kept? In the Akasha. So is the Akashic realm the realm of spiritual economy? Is it the realm of the super etheric? I don't think so. I think that may be a component. But I think that the realm of the Akasha, which is in no matter how small it is, it doesn't matter. There's a speck of Akasha in it. And then it has a reflection in the whole vessel that holds everything, which is finite. It's not infinite. Okay, well, that's not even conceivable. The brain can't do that. Sorry. So to try to describe Akasha, no. And everyone tries to attribute it to the Kordylewski clouds or the plasmasphere or plasmoids. No, those are the tools, as Steiner says. They're the tools of these beings. They're the shadow of them. And he says that when they send this stuff into this realm, it shatters. So when Christ sends all these gifts into us, what do we do with them? Because we have freedom. Some of us squander every bit of it. But some of us say, oh, wait, if Christ is the being who's the Lord of Karma, well, I think I should work with that being. That would probably be easier. And if he's the guardian of the threshold, he's not letting me into the spiritual world until I've worked out my fear, doubt, and hatred and all the other things. I should work with him, right? But then when you say, wait a second, how does John Barnwell remember all that stuff? Then you say, oh, Christ rules the realm of memory. And so one of his gifts, because the etheric is the realm of memory, one of his gifts is the realm of memory. And then you read Steiner and he says, memory is not in the head and it's not in the heart. And even though it may help you memorizing things on stage by doing it with your limbs, it's not there either. Memory is outside of you, just like thought, real archetypes are outside of you and they come in and through you and you're going, huh? I thought those were mine. No, wait, I thought that up. I put a name on it, the Gabriel effect. Or, then that's what science does because they're so small-minded, right? So when you realize that even memory, all memory, and all things that have ever been really fantastically spiritual and wonderful are carved into this Akashic realm. And there's always there for clairvoyance. So this isn't like saying, I'm going up there and get, this or that body. No, it is, when are you going to be moral enough to realize that you need to take the wings of your soul and fly into the spirit and begin to witness your own guardian angel? And then maybe you'll witness this Nathan soul, he calls him, or this other angel. And then you'll see through your astral body of desires into the realm of the etheric. And what will you see there? Christ in a battle for your soul and the soul of every person affected by scientific materialism. That's Ahriman's dream. Everyone who gives their soul over to the subnatural realms of electrostatic, electromagnetic, and basically subnatural or electrogravitational energies. Anyone who gives that over, well, then what do you have to take to the spiritual world? And when you're talking about these things, you're talking about seven heavens, right? No matter what, in all of the discussions, in all traditions, not specifically, in almost all traditions, seven heavens. And when you get up there, what happens? You eat and drink the food of the gods and goddesses. You eat and drink the ambrosia and drink the nectar, and then that makes you eternal. So Psyche did that. She was invited to the table of the gods and goddesses. She drank it. She became immortal. Hercules was put up there because he was tortured so much by Hera, according to the story. I'm not sure I believe that. Apollo's up there. All of these beings are up there. So if you become eternal, you go into this realm, and it can't just be the realm of the stars because they're all at different places. As we look at them, what we see is a complete illusion. So really, what is this etheric realm? Well, I don't know what that is. I can speculate. Boy, could I ever speculate. But I have to read this for people who may only see this section of it. Rudolf Steiner said that from the time that Jesus Christ was on the earth till the 5th or 6th century, anyone who had direct contact with his physical body or any of the leading Christians were in one group of period called the first period. And they and the relics were so extraordinary that miracles traveled with them, basically. That's how all this was spread. Then he says in the second period, from the 6th or 7th century or so, until the 10th century, Christ wove into the etheric bodies of leading Christians. We're going to go over all these next talk. Then in the third period, from the 10th to the 16th century, Christ wove into the astral bodies of leading Christians. Now, when you say astral body, you mean sentient soul, intellectual soul, consciousness soul, and each of those are different. And when you look at those, you go, yeah, those are quite different. So it wouldn't be the same inspiration. And when you look at who represents these and you read their stuff, because in this book are the best quotes that we are able to find of these great beings that we think were characteristic of what would have been Christ speaking through that aspect of the perfected vehicle. Then in the fourth period, from the 16th century onward, Christ is in the ego of a few individuals. Now, of course, that's very few, but that he names. But he says it's not uncommon and that it will become much, much more common as time goes on, especially after 1933. So what we see here is that Christianity spread directly by Christ. Christ working through his disciples, everything he touched. Christ working through these different aspects of these beings. Like take for instance, one, St. Augustine. He was a heretic. He was so fat, they had to carve out the table so his huge stomach could get close enough so he could stuff his face. Read City of God, and you'll think that an angel wrote it. Okay? Just because one aspect or the other is highly blessed by one of these bodies, it doesn't mean they're 100% blessed. No, it doesn't mean that they're overlighted. No, it doesn't mean that they've incarnated that. No, it means that they are connected to it, and they're being used just as so many people in history have been used by Saint Germain, for instance. Steiner tells us even Blavatsky was used by the Comte Saint Germain to write one of her books. And this is the kind of distinction you have to have. And I think why so many people who are anthroposophists have shied away from talking about either one of these two subjects for all the time that I've ever known.
Yeah, actually, it's really the first half of Isis Unveiled that he had a hand in. And of course, it's all greatly affected by the chaotic nature of the soul of Madame Blavatsky. So you have this kind of shimmering image of the Rosicrucian mysteries presented in this mirror of the consciousness of Madame Blavatsky. And so you have Isis Unveiled, but then she turned to the Eastern school soon after, and so you have to be able to separate things that are from her early work and things are from her later work. But that, again, there's so many times we could just take a turn and spend several hours just going over one of these fine points, and I don't want to lose you in the conversation. So in looking at this and trying to scope it in, what we can do is say that you have, as a human being, you have a physical, you have an etheric life body, you have an astral body, that's your body of desires and emotions and all of that. And then you have the I, which people tend to call the ego, but I don't really like that word, but it's the human I. And in German, it's nice because Rudolf Steiner says each, I-C-H, which happens to be the initials of the name of Christ. And it was through the agency of Christ that we received this ego. And Christ himself represents the macrocosmic ego. So he's the greater ego. We have a microcosmic ego. So we can bring our microcosmic ego into relationship to this macrocosmic ego and receive imaginations, inspirations, and intuitions as a result by harmonizing our consciousness with that great being. But it's important to keep in mind that although Christ is working primarily on that level, there are further stages of development that we will go through after the Earth, so that you have your future Jupiter, future Venus, and future Vulcan conditions. And in those conditions, we will go into the development of the spirit self, life spirit, and spirit human. But that those are at our stage currently right now in their microcosmic phase. Even Christ himself has not taken them up as a primary principle, so that if we bring ourselves into relationship to them, it's as if something is raying into us from outside of us. And it's very important to consider, because a lot of people don't get that part right. That Christ is here up to the fourth principle of the I am. I am the I am, as it was said to Moses.
Yes, Christ is the ocean. He's decided that he's raising the ocean and taking all his boats with him. And thank heavens for that, because we really don't even know what the ocean is or what the boat is. So we just have to be thankful, because none of us are worthy for what it is that we are given as a gift, if we simply open ourselves to it and open our eyes, open our ears, and open our heart. Thank you, John.